Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Part 2, we're starting with perimenopause in the workplace and how to expand the conversation beyond white collar. Community Insight offers this. I don't feel my workspace is part of the conversation at all. I don't work in a corporate environment and would have no idea how to start a conversation with my employer about needing time off or having a fan in my workspace. So I'd love to spend a few moments talking about menopause in the workplace as it stands now that you are experiencing. Tamsin, I'd like to start with you because I know you've had conversation about this. And then to Anne-Marie, and then I invite each of you to weigh in on.
Yeah. I don't think I really understood that it was something you could bring into the workplace until the last year or so. It was something that happened to me at the workplace. I discovered it there. I wasn't necessarily comfortable talking about it initially, and then I realized that that is the place to have a conversation. And I was talking to somebody a little earlier during the lunch break, and I was saying that after that happened to me at work, and somebody had heard me talk about it on social media, I had about 4 women in the course of 2 weeks come up and whisper, like, hey, I think I've got these 3 symptoms, and I think I've got could it be this? Do you have a doctor recommendation? Where could I find a doctor? I live in New Jersey. Where could I find a doctor? I live in New York. Who do you recommend? And I was like, oh, I'm the Menopause Whisperer. And then I went, wait a minute. I can't be the Menopause Whisperer. I have to be speaking out loud about it. And that's when I realized that I couldn't feel shame or embarrassment, because for me, it was so closely attached to age. And in the business I am in, the youth is worshipped in front of a camera up until I think very recently. And so I was always afraid of aging out of my career. And then if I talked about something like menopause, would they think that I was, no longer relevant and on my way out? So all that to say that I think that this conversation in the workplace has to be had by us. It's not something that I'm waiting for them to come and talk to us about. It's me coming to talk to them. So after I realized that, I went into the top person at my company and I said, we need a menopause policy. Like, we have to do something, even if it's not about time off and all these, things that scare a lot of employers. But if it's about something as simple as, hey, I might need to wear something different when I come into work. I might not be able to wear that uniform that you want me to wear every day, when we're talking about people that are working where they have to wear a uniform or wear long sleeves, or, hey, I need a fan, or I need to walk outside, or I need to step away from this hot, counter and go someplace else and just take a breather. So I think it's up to us, and I think it's up to us to, start that conversation so more people feel comfortable talking about it. And that's what I hope I've done, and I want to continue to do, because more than one woman has told me I've had to step away from work, or I'm no longer working, or I had to leave my career because I just couldn't handle that, and that's not okay.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Anne-Marie?
Well, I remember when I didn't know I was in perimenopause and I was starting to have sort of brain things, and I was running a department, and I would feel crazy. Like, I remember that. I would feel like I was going crazy, and I would be talking to people like this and thinking, what are they all thinking, looking at me, like, what's going on? But now that I know, I think shame is such a big piece of it, because if you are ashamed of something and you don't want to talk about it, you're going to bring that. And my experience is, when I started talking about menopause, it's been completely fine. And I mean, it's been completely fine in my workplaces, and it's been fine in my dating life. Like, I thought, this is the kiss of death for sure. I'm never going to get married if I start talking about this all the time. Jury's still out on that, but I've done a lot of dating, and it's just fine. But back to the workplace, I now work with some young people. I'm sort of the wise old person that runs this health and wellness platform in the Middle East, and I'll say to them, like, you guys, make sure. I think the sked got caught in a draft because I was in some weird Wi-Fi, but they're like, where's the sked, Anne-Marie? And way too late. Where's the schedule for next week? And I'm like, guys, if I haven't sent it to you, you need to tell me, because my brain's like a little in reconstruction right now. Right? We're having some renovations there, so you need to tell me, because. And they're fine. Maybe they talk about me behind my back. I don't know. The point is, my brain is going through an upgrade, and it's important that I just say it rather than try to cover it up or something like that. But I'm also really interested in, all the places, you know, women at cash registers, women, like there's way more tribunals on this, and if you're running any kind of business, it would be very smart to get yourself a menopause policy before it comes to get you, right? And it's all sorts of ways. Like I read about a case in the UK where a woman worked at a pet food store, and her boss was just making fun of her all the time, you know? Like she'd forget stuff, and he would be like, oh, you're going through the menopause. And he ended up having to pay a hefty settlement for that situation. And I just feel so much for that woman because she's working in the pet food store. She's not making very much money. And then she's got this jerk making fun of her menopause. So I just think it's important that we think of all the different places. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the media are quite privileged. So they're writing about it from like the woman fanning herself with shame in the courtroom or the boardroom, as opposed to someone who's on construction or working at McDonald's or working in a prison, you know, all the different places.
Terrific, thank you.
So I can touch on that a little bit because a significant amount of the work I do is in the workplace. I do a lot of corporate talks, but I also do talks for organizations and for non-for-profits. So I'm hoping that there's like a full sort of gamut of women that I'm talking to, and they all matter. I don't care if they're corporate, or white label or blue label, right? They're all struggling and they need to be seen. And so that's the sort of way I come at this. And as far as corporate's concerned, I'm like, we have to be able to get in the corporate workplace. Now, sometimes that's hard because if you've got CEOs and CFOs that are women, they don't want to have a conversation about menopause. So I've had to like navigate that to say, I'm not going to come in and diminish anything that you've achieved for decades of trying to get to the top of our game. What we're trying to say is that 1 in 10 women are leaving the workplace. It's costing the economy $150 billion a year from women leaving the workplace. And the solutions to this are very simple. Compassionate conversation, potentially workplace blueprint. You don't even need that. You just need a quiet space so that Bob eating his peanuts doesn't drive you crazy, right? You just like, it doesn't need to be complicated. And then going down to like different people in the workplace, I've done tons of talks for the police in Scotland. They've now changed their uniform. Women aren't wearing polyester shirts. They're wearing wicking shirts. Like, yes. I mean, it's not complicated. And that's the thing. I just think all you need to do is open the door to this conversation. And you don't need to have these drastic task forces to do that. You just need to have one person in HR that you go to and go, I can't do it today. Like, what am I going to do? Go home. It's okay. Yeah. But we're not going to take the piss. We're literally going to do our jobs to our best of our ability. And so when we try and speak to all women, I say that, you know, people like us can use our voices to gain entry. All of the women here, you only need to speak to one other person, and that person's going to talk to other people. And then just to finish off, I did this Police Scotland talk, and there was 300 people there, and the chief inspector was there, and at the end of it, he came on and he went, I'm just really sorry. I had no idea, and I'm completely going to change the way that this culture is in this organization. And so you don't know who's listening, so just keep talking is my advice, yes.
Thank you, terrific. Anyone else?
You know, if I had to say what would be the most important thing that employers could do for their female employees is to make sure that they have health care. Because at the end of the day, it's not just an inconvenience about, you know, I don't need a fan, I need insurance. I need access, you know, I need access so I can get treatment. I need education about this. And so that's why I said it's not just a, let's turn the air conditioning down. That's a, you know, that's downstream effect. But I think that the biggest problem that women are going to have about this is, again, that knowledge gap of not knowing how to access treatment if you need treatment. And for most women, that's going to be hormones. That's just the reality of it. But I do worry about the women who don't have the luxury of saying, I'm just going to quit my job because I'm, you know, my brain's a little foggy today. That's not the lived reality for like 95% of women in the workforce. And we're here and we aren't going anywhere. So, you know, if you said for those women who aren't in corporate boards and not CEOs, make sure that your employees have adequate health care and access. And if you do that, I think that a lot of the problems that we're having in the workplace will go away.
And to add to that, to not shame them for taking time off to go to the doctor, right?
And
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, one more thing I want to say. I feel like it's every phase of a woman's life too,
Yes.
whether it's maternity policies,
Yep.
whether it's this. So I think it's really, really important to start those conversations to honestly encompass all women, right? Because we go through these every couple years, like we're going through something in our bodies. And I don't think necessarily we need to target it only towards maternity or only towards, you know, peri, postmenopausal, but I think there needs to be workplace accommodations throughout a woman's adulthood, because it's very uncomfortable for employers to talk about this, and it's uncomfortable in society for women to talk about how uncomfortable they are. Nobody wants to hear it. And so I think there needs to be, again, whether that advocacy happens in the doctor's office or at work, you know, through health insurance policies, those policies need to be in place, I think, for all of these phases of a woman's life. And it's just not happening enough.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Moving on, if I may, how to prepare the next generation. I am 42 now and know that I am in full peri. 4 years ago, I had no idea that perimenopause even existed. Why doesn't anyone tell us? So this question, this sentiment coming from community members on the app encouraged me to think about the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, that most women will know about in their 20s. We all sort of understand it to be a resource on pregnancy and post-pregnancy. So with that, I thought that how do you all, as leaders, business owners, scientists, and so on, enlighten and prepare in a concrete fashion, much like this book, future menopausal people about what to expect? Dr. Malone, if you would start us off.
Well, I'm quite encouraged, because not only is there more conversation than there's ever been, but there are more resources out there. I mean, every time I look around, there's another menopause book. There's a peri journal that's out here. And I say yay to that, because for the most part, I don't think that any of them are so far off the rails that I wouldn't recommend them. You know, they are books that describe what's going on, what your options are, you choose. So I think that this next generation that's coming behind me, they are going to enter this space well informed about what to expect during menopause. And so I think that every time I see someone who's published another book or is out there, I'm like, yay on that, because there's going to be a book that speaks to you about this experience. So the more voices, the better.
Great. And Dr. Joy Allen?
I think, like you said, Dr. Sharon said about the resources, there are definitely a lot more out there. And what I also want to encourage all of us is to also have the conversations amongst ourselves, amongst our families, amongst our friends. I'm raising 2 girls and a boy, right? 12, 10, and 8. And they know what menopause is. They've heard of menopause. So now my girl's not going to come to this stage and be like, okay, what the hell is this? What is happening? So having those conversations and normalizing these conversations amongst ourselves, I think is very important for the next generations coming up behind us. So they won't come to this point and be like totally like blindsided, like I wasn't expecting this at all. Now they hear about it, they hear all the terminology, they hear what it means, what it may look like, and again also know that they may be different for them or their sister or their friend or whatever. But just normalize conversation amongst ourselves, I think is very important for the next generation, you know, talking to our daughters and our nieces and whoever, female family members and men, because they need to know. They need to know.
Thank you.
You know, just to add on to that, I mean, we do talk about our periods.
Yes.
Right.
We don't go through puberty and say, oh, you're bleeding, good for you.
Right.
You know, let me tell you what's happening. So this idea of what you were saying, that there is a continuum to female physiology, whether it is about menstruation or pregnancy or postpartum or menopause, that really should be taught as a holistic idea.
Right.
Thank you, thank you.
I think one of the things is just the word that keeps coming to my mind with this conversation is stigma. And I think we need to break that stigma around menopause and, you know, or any aspect of a woman's life. And once we break that, it makes it easier to talk about. Because it's right now like very hush-hush and people are embarrassed. And I don't think it is as much as it was maybe in the last generation. But I think that that stigma needs to be broken so that those resources are more accessible and people aren't necessarily embarrassed to access those sorts of resources.
And I've said this earlier on. The first time you say the M word out loud, you're like a little bit nervous, but then you're just like, whatever. You know, like it's like, a funny example of this is in my book, I talk about my sex life, and my oldest son, who has one friend in the world, came round. His friend came around and saw a picture of me on the book like this, and his friend opened up and went, your mum wrote a fitness book. Oh, she's having a really bad time with her sex life. And my son's like, he's my only friend. And my son's like, it's menopause. You know, like, and so whatever, like it is. And I actually think the second generation, the next generation coming up, are not going to stand for this. They're not. My nieces are furious. They're like, no, why? Why don't I know about this? And so we're paving the way. It definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. This is our last question, and I would invite each of you to respond. I'm going to ask Dr. Malone to respond first because I know you're on the clock. Moving forward, when you're looking at the current landscape, what's missing for each of you? What's bothering you, nudging at your senses about the conversation as it stands to date? What do you feel needs more light shed on it? And what part of the conversation feels inadequate, saturated, or clumsy? In 5 years, where do you want the menopause space to be?
How much, how much time do you have? Let me say this, because I think it's really important. And it's amazing how one voice can change a conversation, and then we're on to something else, and we accept that as normal. There is a very smart woman, Jennifer Weiss-Wolf. She's at NYU, she's at law, Birnbaum Law Center there, and she was at the Brennan Center before. She wrote a book called Periods Gone Public. And she is the person that I will say is personally responsible for the term menstrual equity. Every time you go into a bathroom and there are pads and tampons there that are available to you, she's brought up the issue of saying, what do poor girls do? What do women who are out unhoused do about menstrual products? Why do they cost that much? Why are there taxes on menstrual products? Because it only affects us. We're only 51% of the population. These are the things that I think, as from a policy-wise, the things that you and I are not going to be able to change on a day-to-day basis. But there are things from legislation. Why don't we have more research into women's reproductive lives at all stages? Why do we not have, the equitable research just in terms of, how we react to everything else? Women are not little men. Everything, the research has been in the past done on men, and it's just titrated down to women. So we need to have a little bit more equity there in terms of those research dollars. I think that it just burns me up that every time I hear something about the Women's Health Initiative, and I said, well, if we're still arguing, what stopped you from answering the question? We could have had 20 more studies that answered these questions in the 20 years that we've been arguing about it. And so we don't get our due. We don't get, and you talk about policy issues, Medicare does not cover a lot of hormone replacement, simple things, vaginal estrogen. Why does that cost $300 a tube? And I hear, my patients would come in and complain and say, oh my God, I want this, but I can't afford it. These are things that, like I said, if we're having the same conversation 5 years from now, I'm going to be very disappointed. But I think that we have got to advocate for ourselves in the public sphere, that we get to, we get to change policies and laws and behaviors. And then that's when we know that we've really achieved full equity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tamsin,
snaps and claps all around. Tamsin, I'm going to go your way because I think you may be on the clock as well.
I think coming off of what Dr. Sharon is saying, I think there's a few things I hear over and over again when I talk about hormone therapy is that doesn't that cause breast cancer? Comments, tens of thousands, and that upsets me, not because I'm telling anybody that they have to take hormones, but because that should be an option if that is what they need. And there's such a fear there as a result of that study. And I lost my grandmother to breast cancer, so it was my fear too, and I think that's part of the reason that my voice is so loud about this, at least the education of it. So I'd like people to at least understand the options that are there, and that's what I try to do in a way that's educational and entertaining, just so people remember and they're willing to talk about it. That's what I'm hopeful for. And I'd like to see the men educated too on all of this. And I have a 12-year-old nephew and I have an 83-year-old father, and both of them have asked me about menopause.
That's great.
My little nephew went to his mom and said, "What is Aunt Hampson always talking about menopause on Instagram?" And that made me really encouraged.
Yeah.
And then my 83-year-old father said, "I didn't know you were going through that so early." And I said, "I'm 52. It's not early." But that's something I'd like to see change. I'd like men to be as educated, because they're alongside us out there, and whether we're working with them or we're dating them or married to them or friends with them, they need to know.
Awesome. Thank you. Stacy.
Yeah, I mean, I can only echo those sentiments. I think that's, the big piece of the puzzle that's really missing from here. And when you think about things like, what are the two biggest things that men in midlife are dealing with, like ED or hair loss? There are cajillions of products for them. And in fact, I think Viagra was approved in 6 months, something like that, right? And, a female libido pill, something like that, took years to get FDA approval. So who is on the FDA?
Right.
Who is making these choices, and how are they being made? So that we get the attention that we deserve. I think that's where some of this confusion comes in, is because there is just not straight up legislation that really defines what is happening to us. And also, I would love to see corporations, like big hotels. If you can order a pillow that is down or acrylic, why can't you order a cooling pillow for your room? Why can't you have cooling sheets? Why doesn't the air conditioner go down to 65 if you need it to? We can be doing things more culturally, I think, that would, benefit corporations and customers.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shelby.
I think coming from when we were talking about like getting the word out to people, from my stance, I had started an Instagram account a few years ago because there was so much misinformation about sleep and women especially out there. So I see so many men and sometimes women who are telling women that the way to get better sleep is to get up at the same time every morning, get light, and that's going to solve all your problems. And yes, that's important for certain things, but it's not going to solve everything. And I would hope in the next few years that there are more female voices out there talking about the challenges of, like, we can't all have an hour-long wind-down routine that's going to solve our sleep problem. And it's not going to solve most people's sleep. It's important, but it's not an hour. So to really talk about the challenges that women are facing, whether it's taking care of their kids, taking care of older parents, and working, and hormonal changes, and trying to fit in some sleep in there, and having those voices in the culture more, I think is really important.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Joyelle.
I want to speak to the rising physicians in regards to having more education and training in menopause and midlife health, which is a big part of, women are coming into these offices, medical offices, and physicians, I know from just speaking to other patients and other doctors, some are intimidated when these women are coming in and they're like, I don't want to be bothered by, it's just, so having, medical students, residents, having a significant amount of time on education in regards to, and not just OBGYN, family medicine, because menopause affects so many body systems, right? Estrogen receptors are all over from head to toe in our bodies. So having physicians, rising physicians, be educated, significant amount of time of education around menopause and midlife health and how that affects multiple body systems and impact women's overall health and wellness. I think that I would love to see that.
Great, thank you. Anne-Marie.
Back to the research piece. It's a crazy thing when you search in PubMed, which is the database of National Institutes of Health, of all the medical studies that have been done. There's 1.1 million studies on pregnancy and like 94,000 studies on menopause and like 6,000 studies on perimenopause. Like it has not even begun to be studied. 1/10 of something every person goes through. So that is something that's just blows your mind. And so when I hear people speaking very definitively, you know, like people started in the last couple of years to say science. It's like science is constantly evolving process of inquiry, but there just needs to be way more research. And after the Women's Health Initiative study, things really it became sort of precarious to study. Another thing is that I just don't think some of the observational studies that we're seeing piece out synthetic hormones versus bioidentical hormones. And so you're getting, I think, really conflicting data because they're all lumped together. And so there was just a study published in the British Medical Journal this week about if you take hormone therapy, it increases your risk for dementia. Well, that is very confusing for women because we're told that it reduces your risk for dementia. But I honestly, when I'm looking and trying to piece through, I don't see that they've talked, there's such long-ranging studies that they're just lumping it all together. So I find that really strange. And then the last thing is, love estrogen. It was like the first thing they discovered, but there's other hormones. And I'd like to hear more about testosterone and progesterone and DHEA and like some of, you know, some more options. Because a lot of times I feel like it's estrogen. And I know it's really important, but I also think it's just sort of the first one.
Right.
And even testosterone is our most abundant hormone. Progesterone is very important. Progesterone is the reason we all start losing it in the beginning of perimenopause because it's going down and it's what has helped us in our stress response. So those are some things I would like that get me kind of ornery.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So these are all amazing. What I would like to see in the next 5 years is for women to know that they spend most of their adult life in a menopausal state, from perimenopause till the day they die. So it matters what we do from our own personal health perspective. And obviously this is my bread and butter and I talk about this a lot, but if we know that post-menopause we're at higher risk for diseases, you know, our risk profile increases, and if we know that exercise, nutrition, stress management, improved sleep, even building resilient mindset, like how we talk about aging, if we can get women to know, regardless of whether they take hormone therapy or not, they have to look at their overall health. We want to live longer with quality, not just live longer.
Right.
And it should be accessible across the board, including the social determinants of health. Like if we can just explain how important walking is and moving every day is to everyone, and we can just even give access to women, to or families, to better food quality, etc. Like there's so much we can do outside of the medical conversation. I'd like to see more emphasis on that personally.
Thank you.
I love what you said. Like everyone has such amazing things to say. So being the last, I don't know if I'm going to offer something very innovative.
Yeah.
But the one thing I actually really care about from the medical perspective, you know, from an endocrine and obesity medicine standpoint, is cardiovascular disease and cardiometabolic disease. And so, you know, one of the #1 killers of women in the menopausal age is cardiovascular disease. So what are we doing to prevent this, right? Our population is looking at 150 million people being in the overweight or obese category by 2030. We're not that far away from 2030. What are we doing to combat this, right? And so I think one of the bigger things I want to see is a greater shift into preventive care. And that includes addressing perimenopause early, that includes addressing menopause early, and helping women, especially given how significant cardiovascular disease is in that age group, helping women get healthier early on so that they and their next generation is going to be healthier as well. And this starts early because that affects their children, that affects their families, and so on and so on. And so we don't get healthier as a society until we start really addressing the environment around us, our food environment, and really, you know, it's not just hormones, but it's so much of everything else as well. So how do we, as, you know, women or just even society in general, get healthier? And I mean, I think that a lot of it starts with, let's start cutting back on processed foods. Let's stop going to the, you know, fast food restaurant on every corner in this country. We need to, I think, and that's where advocacy really does come in, because it's, you know, obviously, yes, from an individual standpoint with your doctor, that's extremely important, but medical care is not scalable. How do we scale health? And that is one of the things I think about a lot. And so, you know, with all the digital tech available and everything, I'm hoping that there will be something that addresses preventive care better than we have right now.
Terrific, thank you. Before I close this out, I just wanted to ask if there is a question or two among us for our panelists. Hoda.
I guess I don't know if I have a question, but just a comment in terms of what, hello. It's more of a, I guess, a comment, or just if anybody wants to comment on it. One of the things that I have seen with the dialogue around menopause in different settings is when women have not experienced symptoms, because there is, I don't know, 15% of women that don't experience symptoms. And what I usually see is, that didn't happen to me. And what I would hope is that women who don't experience symptoms become part of the conversation, become advocates. Because it's not helpful when, you're trying to say, like, this is an issue, and then you have somebody else saying, well, it didn't really affect me. So, I don't know, that's what I've seen. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
I would just say also that just because you didn't have perimenopausal symptoms doesn't mean you're not going to be postmenopausal.
Right.
And all of the things that you were just discussing and that Dr. Malone has said as well are things that we need to address. Cardiac, cognitive, and bone health are going to help. I mean, they're going to progress whether you have
Symptoms or not.
perimenopausal symptoms or not. I'm no longer able to speak.
Got it down.
And here's another thing that women don't, because they sometimes don't connect it because it happens years after they've gone through this. So they, that's why I don't really like the term postmenopause, because I'm like, that implies you're over it and you're never over it.
Right.
It's going. And the often unaddressed issue are the things like what's called the genital urinary syndrome of menopause. So whether you had never had a hot flash, 10, 15 years of no estrogen, you're going to have problems with urinary tract infections, urgency, frequency, and these are things that have real life implications for you as you age. So, for someone to say, that sounds great, I'm happy if you didn't have hot flashes. No one should have to suffer through that. But even if you didn't, don't think that those things that we're talking about long-term health, but a simple one, just in terms of painful sex, urinary stuff, and vaginal dryness and irritation, that will happen. And again, 80% of women will have those symptoms whether they had a hot flash or not.
Thank you. May I take another? Oh, there we go.
Thank you all for being here. I just wanted to urge everybody as a call to action to reach out to your legislators, because something that Stacy said is there isn't enough legislation. And if everyone in here reached out to their state and federal legislators kind of demanding or asking where they are on an issue, it's going to create those conversations, especially as we're coming up to an election. And I know people don't like to get political, but so much of what I'm hearing today is that this really is a political issue as much as anything. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, as somebody who's been in therapy, it was shocking to me. It wasn't until Stacy again introduced the idea that I could be actually a little bit mentally insane because of symptoms from, and she probably said it nicer and didn't make me feel bad about it. But she definitely did say it nicer and didn't make me feel about it. But when I brought it up to my therapist as one idea, she was like, well, it was very dismissive. And it wasn't until my endocrinologist actually said, as someone who can't go on or won't go on hormone replacement because of a cancer history, she said, well, try Wellbutrin. It has an off-label effect. And so it was me kind of advocating in that way, but it was surprising in retrospect that a female therapist didn't even introduce this as a concept. So I don't know if you have
As a clinical psychologist and a sleep specialist, they don't train this stuff in graduate school. They don't train about sleep. I had to get all of my sleep stuff and training postgraduate, which is ridiculous, and it's the most effective treatment that we have. So they don't treat, it's really not at all, they treat, men and women are very similar, and they still, it's been a long time since I graduated, it's still, all the training is the same. So it's a big problem, and people are getting it on fellowship now. So you really want to ask someone, if you have a therapist and you really want to specialize in women's issues, or ask them what kind of fellowship training they've had. Postgraduate training is really going to be the key when you're asking.
Terrific, thank you. Anyone question back there, just in case? So sorry, go ahead. You've got it.
Sorry, it seems not a lot of questions today, but comments. And just to pick up on a couple of themes that were introduced, one is representation and one is giving voice. And Dr. Sharon talked about the need for access to health insurance, because there are so many women who don't even have the option of going to their doctor because they don't have health insurance. So I think that's something that we should always give voice to in rooms such as this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I had closing remarks, but you've all really spoken so beautifully what I was not going to say. But I will say, I was sitting here listening and actually was thinking about the psychological component. And I think for many women, myself included, that was a piece that I did not put together with perimenopause because that was the one piece that really wasn't spoken about that much, that you could sort of be entering into this season of life with in psychological distress. And that, I think, born of conversations like this, that becomes a much more common subject and allows for more of us to consider that maybe this is what's going on. So that is what I think about in 5 years from now. With that, I thank each of you so much. This has just been a tremendous afternoon and morning. You all are the thought leaders, the specialists, the go-getters who, among others here and out there, are pushing this conversation forward. So I thank you for coming, many of you from far away. Abu Dhabi, she wins the distance. And thank you to Laura Crane, who in her 30s just thought this would be a good idea. and really carved out space for each of us. Each of you are carving out space for all of us. And I thank you, and thank you for coming and being a participant here. I hope we do it again. Laura. And until then, be well. Everyone get home safe, and thank you.
Okay.
Oh, you're getting a journal. Everyone gets a journal. We're going to do a quick countdown. Thank you.
We're doing the
Everybody counts, and at 0 we're going to scream Perry Sisters and take a scream. You're really loud. I have mine.
Why are we doing it just in the end?
It's like throwing it like a cap and gown here. I don't know. Where are we holding it up? Where's the picture taken? Oh, there. There. Okay.
Are we going this way here?
I don't want to block. Okay. Are we counting?
Yeah. It's not going down. 4.
Oh. 3. 2.